extortion,
integrity, hard work,
murder, racketeering,
family, never forgetting where we came from.
First up is one of the best movies of the year, American Gangster. It opens next week. We've got the early review. I'm Richard Roeper.
And I'm Michael Phillips for the Chicago Tribune.
Oscar winners Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington deliver equally powerful performances in a parallel story that doesn't put them on screen together until very deep into this 2-hour and 40-minute crime epic, which is based on a true story. Washington has the flashier role. He plays Frank Lucas, who's filled with ruthless ambition to become the drug kingpin of Harlem in the 70s.
What you got on?
It's a very, very, very nice suit.
That's a very, very, very nice suit. That's a clown suit. That's a costume with a big sign on it that says arrest me. You understand? You're too loud. You're making too much noise. Look at me. The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. I told you that.
Crowe plays Richie Roberts. He's a cop so honest he turns in $1 million in untraceable drug money, much to the dismay of his more corrupt colleagues. His very honesty makes him a pariah in the force until he's put in charge of a special narcotics unit.
Our mandate is to make major arrests, no street guys. We're looking for the suppliers and the distributors. Heroin, cocaine, amphetamines, no grass under 1,000 pounds, no powder under 40 kilograms. Any less than that, then somebody else can waste their time. We're going to be handling the big shipments, the big money, and big temptation.
Josh Brolin, very good here, oozing slime as a narcotics detective who's just as corrupt as the gangsters and dealers he's supposed to be busting.
Special Investigations Unit. Special. Get it? 10 grand. First of each month. Deliver it right here.
Lucas likes to think of himself as a businessman who cares for his people in his neighborhood, but we see flashes of his sociopathic personality.
From now on, don't nobody talk to me directly. You understand? You got business with me. You talk to Huey. Huey, you talk to me. You got it?
All right.
Damn it, never on the phone. You got it?
I got it.
All right. And take them damn sunglasses off. Take the damn sunglasses off.
Damn it, man.
American Gangster is directed by Ridley Scott, who takes an almost docudrama approach here. He lets the story move at the right pace, giving just about equal time to the stories of the crusading cop and the ambitious gangster. Now, ironically, Lucas has a much richer and more stable personal and family life than Roberts. After more than 2 hours of a solid crime story, American Gangster gets even better as we learn the ultimate fates of these two men. There's not one dull or inauthentic moment in this film. Michael, I think we're kicking off Oscar contender season right here.
Yeah, no, it's definitely Oscar bait, and it's very good. I don't think it's great, but I think it's good for a lot of reasons. Spectacular acting, as you say, really in tiny roles on up to the leads, and it's a pleasure, even though they're in separate orbits, the whole story. Yeah. It's a pleasure to watch Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe just sort of really make real
it's kind of
human
like,
beings.
Remember Michael Mann's Heat, where Pacino and De Niro don't have, they have the one famous scene together, but most of the time we're getting the parallel stories.
The one thing I ding the screenplay by Steve Zalian on, I don't think it really does the film any favors to be that even-handed about sharing the stories, because in the end, it's Frank Lucas's story, you know what I mean? And I wish that the film were slightly more in his camp, because it sort of belongs to a series of films that takes a white character to tell a black character story.
I don't agree with that criticism,
a little
Michael.
Bit.
I think it's, it's very even-handed, and it's Richie's story as much as it's Frank's story, and we see both. And I really like the idea that, the cop who is a Boy Scout as a cop.
Yeah,
he is, he knows what the right thing to do is, and he will do it.
And Crowe knows how to do that without making it feel like
But his personal life is a disaster. He's a horrible ex-husband. He's a bad father. He's, having all these inappropriate relationships with his lawyer and with all this other stuff. That's a mess. And then you see Frank Lucas, who is a killer and is a drug dealer, but he loves his family.
I think the other irony of the film plays very heavily is this idea of how Frank Lucas got the drugs over, the heroin over from Vietnam to the U.S.
Stuff.
I don't want to necessarily blow it.
But again, you get the the Vietnam story. It's not just a story playing on the TV to let us know that, hey, it's the early 70s. It's a huge part of this film.
I did enjoy and was involved with both tracks of the story. I do think that, ironically, the Richie Roberts side of the story comes more from real life. That's how it feels. And Crowe is a very good actor, and he knows how to bring it to life. It's the acting that really sort of takes you through a steadily absorbing film.
Yeah. So, big movie.
Yeah. Often we go to the movies for simple reasons, really. A compelling story and the right cast to bring it to life. Music Within has both things going for it, but two big things going against it, the script and the direction. It's based on the real-life tale of disability rights activist Richard Pimentel, who served in Vietnam and came home afflicted by near deafness. Soon, he acquired an appreciation for all sorts of marginalized citizens. In this scene, Pimentel, played by Ron Livingston, he was in the comedy Office Space, meets Art, who has cerebral palsy and a nasty sense of sarcasm.
You think you're too good to talk to me?
Wait a minute, I understood that. Richard.
Art, you better wash your hands. This may be contagious.
That's Michael Sheen in the wheelchair, a long and impressive way from his work as Tony Blair in The Queen. The real-life equivalents of the Music Within characters no doubt endured a lot of humiliation, but I suspect even the worst of it carried a little more dramatic shading than this run-in with a waitress at a restaurant years away from being handicap accessible.
You're making the other customers very uncomfortable.
You gotta be kidding me. It's my friend's birthday. All he wants is pancakes.
She needs some.
He says he's very sorry for turning your customers' stomachs. That's obviously your job.
Pimentel found jobs for disabled veterans and eventually led the charge to create the Americans with Disabilities Act. Problem is, Music Within has a very pedestrian sense of how to tell this interesting man's story. Livingston and Sheen and Hector Elizondo, as a debate coach, are all fully up to the challenge, and the screenplay they're required to humanize is fully not. It's too bad, because I really like these actors.
I agree with you completely here, Michael. I wanted to like this film. All great respect to Mr. Pimentel. I mean, he's an important figure. I like Ron Livingston. He always kind of reminded me of like Tom Hanks with a weaker chin, but he's he could play the same kind of roles. But that scene you showed with the waitress embodies everything that's wrong with this movie. It's so over the top. I almost expected her to reach into her apron and pull out rocks and start throwing them at them. You know, you're horrible freaks. I mean, it's like, and of course we know that people had to be enlightened, and you and I are old enough to remember a time when there weren't ramps and handicap accessible parking and all that kind of thing, and that's, you know, that's a great and important story, but this is done in such a kind of made-for-TV, connect the dots kind of way, and then we even have him narrating sometimes. It's like, well, can't you just show us in less, you know, less over-the-top way?
It goes back to my theory that acting is usually the last thing to go wrong with just about any film, and this is the case here because it's a very good cast, and I think Livingston is a very interesting, very low-key actor. Yeah, Mr. Iowa, he comes from Iowa. Did you know that? He comes from Iowa.
Well,
so how bad can he be?
Thank you for putting an actual footnote on this review. Okay, later in the show, so Steve Carell takes a day off from The Office with Dan in real life. And next, Philip Seymour Hoffman and Ethan Hawke star in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
It's a jewelry store, a mom-and-pop operation.
You ain't never done this before.
Get a gun. You get a toy gun.
There's no shooting. You do the driving, I do the thing. Right.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, Ethan Hawke, Marissa Tomei, and Albert Finney are among the standouts in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. This film sometimes feels like a minor masterpiece and sometimes veers wildly off the tracks, often in the same scene. Talk about your basic mixed recommendation. That's what I'm giving this baby. Hoffman is the king of playing shifty guys who look like they start sweating the moment they step out of the shower. He plays Andy Hansen, a successful but corrupt and seriously messed up businessman. Ethan Hawke plays younger brother Hank. He's even more of a screw-up.
Andy.
Yeah.
That's Mom and Dad's story.
That's what I said. The mom-and-pop operation.
We see the robbery of a suburban jewelry store and the consequences of that botched robbery from multiple perspectives and multiple time frames. I also have to mention the brave work of Marissa Tomei here as Andy's wife. She's a spectacularly sexy woman with some dark secrets of her own.
Every Thursday, me and your brother, Hank, we get together. Not only that, he loves me. And he still finds me attractive.
Before the Devil Knows You're Dead looks like it could have been directed by Quentin Tarantino or some 25-year-old hipster. It's actually the work of 83-year-old Sidney Lumet, who directed 12 Angry Men in the 50s and Dog Day Afternoon in the 70s, and is still in prime form. The more we learn about the Hansen family, the more things spiral out of control. It's the stuff of Greek tragedy. The last 15 minutes of this film had me shaking my head in disbelief, yet I found myself thinking about the performances, the tone, the perfection in certain scenes, long after the movie was over. So, Michael, I did have reservations, but I am recommending it.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend it myself. Although the tone is the key here. It does not make any concessions to make it easy for the audience. Now, the picture also starts off with these two excellent scenes. The first one with set in Rio with Philip Seymour Hoffman and Marisa Tomei, and then you get the first image of the botched robbery. And those two scenes are electric. They're really good.
Right.
And then the movie's more of a fader than a builder. You know what I mean? I think, but what I kept thinking about was Prizzi's Honor. Remember that, the John Huston film?
Sure.
You know, like Huston, who was kind of late in his career when he did Prizzi's Honor, I think Lumet just isn't interested in sort of establishing a really clear line of moral compass for the audience, or even figuring out, you know, what type of movie he's supposed to be. I think he's experimenting here, and audiences may or may not go with it, but I think the actors really respond to it.
I mean, you know, you talk about all these terrific performances. Yeah, I did kind of feel like, you know, there was an unspoken or untold story between Albert Finney playing the father of these two guys. We get sort of why there are problems there, but we don't really see that in the Albert Finney character. I don't want to give away too much, but we don't exactly see his failings. We hear people talk about it more than we see it.
Right.
But I like the way, you know, we've talked about other films where they kind of jump around with the time just to do it, and this actually is kind of neat just to see even a phone call shown from 3 different perspectives, and where the other people were during the phone call, what they're up to.
Yeah, I'd argue with the time frame and the chronology scramble, because I don't think in the end that really helps our engagement with the film. The other thing I don't think that works for me so much is Ethan Hawke. He's working as hard as he can to keep up with a cast that's essentially one notch ahead of him. But you know, in the end, I think if you focus on these sort of really kind of bittersweet character relationships, I think you have a very
that's the most
picture.
interesting element there. Yeah, absolutely. Coming up next, Steve Carell and Dane Cook are brothers in love with the same woman in Dan in real life.
This is my brother, Dan.
But first, here's another review from the Balcony Archive, where you can watch 20 years of movie reviews and see my list for the scariest movies to watch this Halloween. It's all at themoviestv.com.
If you and I had been in the theater, I still would have.
There would have been one person laughing. That would have been great. And I would have been. I would have thrown jujubes at your head from the back row.
You would have. Well, I shoot back.
Well,
so anyway,
I heard that about you.
Yeah, I know you did. Everybody has.
On 3.
Looking at movies now in theaters, neither of us like 30 Days of Night. We're both recommending Things We Lost in the Fire, and I really like Gone Baby Gone. Michael, not so much.
Not so much, that's right. But, you know, next time for Mr. Affleck.
I hope so.
Okay, at a time when most romantic comedies tend to go for raunch rather than romance, can a low-key charmer like Dan in real life make itself heard? I certainly hope so. Steve Carell plays an advice columnist who's a widower and father of 3 girls, and he's not quite ready to see either of his older daughters start dating.
What was that? What are you doing? Can you be more embarrassing?
Sorry to interrupt your studies with your friend.
Well, we can't all be monks like you. No.
By the way, you're grounded.
Oh, I'm grounded?
Yep.
For how long?
For life.
On vacation with his extended family, Dan visits a bookstore where he meets Marie, played by Juliette Binoche. He is instantly smitten. Tiny problem, she's dating Dan's brother, played by Dane Cook, and her presence in the summer home makes Dan alternately horny, moony, depressed, and desperate.
You know, stop reading my book, okay? Just stop. And that salsa thing you do?
What are you talking about?
The salsa dance. This thing. If you could just not do that.
Dan's folks fix him up with someone he knew years ago, and on a highly competitive double date, Dan and his unsuspecting brother hit the dance floor with the ladies. Writer-director Peter Hedges co-wrote the script for About a Boy, which was one of Hugh Grant's best pictures, I thought. And his ensemble work here has a very light touch. You sometimes wish Hedges had dug a little deeper, but his confection works well enough to make you forget that Dane Cook was ever in Good Luck Chuck, or that the mega-budget Evan Almighty rendered Steve Carell temporarily unfunny. Sometimes I think low-key is the right key, and I really did like this.
You know, Michael, I'm right with you on this. There's nothing spectacular going on here. It's a sweater movie. You wear a sweater watching it. The characters in the movie are all wearing sweaters.
What kind of sweater?
A nice, comfortable, warm sweater, because it's kind of a movie equivalent of comfort food.
So it's like a slippers movie.
Exactly. It's very comfortable and very nice. And you know, Steve Carell, I think, is starting to have kind of a Greg Kinnear-like career path, where at first he was just going to be in comedies, but you find out that there's a little bit more range here. And he's very good. He's very believable. as the widowed father of these young girls. Those relationships are interesting. The romance, you somehow believe, actually, that Juliette Binoche could date Dane Cook and then fall for Steve Carell, where that could be a fantasy in lesser hands. So it's a nice film. There's
here's
nice touches to it.
I'll tell you the odd thing, too. The scene that introduces the Binoche character in the bookstore, that is a very awkwardly written and played scene. And I thought, my God, this film is off to a sudden derailment. But the film somehow recovers on that. And I think it's really a matter of Binoche kind of getting comfortable with, American romantic comedy.
Yeah.
And I think Carell and Binoche really do work well together.
They have you're right. You wouldn't have imagined these two together. It doesn't seem like something you'd want to see, but they do a nice job.
I would actually argue that Carell's always been a good actor. I mean, even on The Daily Show, the reason that has been such a great training ground for people is that it's all about kind of keeping it real, deadpan. And I think he's very...
You mean they're acting on The Daily Show?
Well, it's not technically acting.
Boy, the things I'm learning from you. Next up is Control, a film that perfectly captures the essence of the legendary and influential cult band Joy Division and its tragic lead singer, Ian Curtis. Filmed in stark and beautiful black and white, Control might seem too bleak, too long, and too depressing for non-fans of the music. But if you found touches of genius in Joy Division's influential post-punk sound, I think you'll be blown away here by Sam Riley's performance as the troubled Curtis.
Side effects include drowsiness, apathy, and blurred vision. I'm checking 2.
The always excellent Samantha Morton plays Curtis's wife. She's thrilled, at least at first, by his success.
He is quite famous now, though, isn't he? Not to me. I still wash his underpants.
Control doesn't glamorize Curtis or his fate. If anything, we get too many scenes of him fighting with his wife or collapsing into fits. I would have liked to see a little bit more of the creative process. I'm not sure if this movie is going to resonate with those who don't know the music, but for fans, it's definitely a must-see.
Yeah, I was not a Joy Division, expert going into this, but I did think it was, especially the first hour, very involving. It took me a while at the midpoint to kind of reconcile the fact that it's really the most stately-looking movie ever made about a rock subject, you know what I mean? Because it's very austere, and the pace is very measured. There's a lot of quiet in the picture, too, for a rock film. But I do think, it's a really strong aesthetic visually. And for me, again, as I say, a lot of the music was relatively new to me, and I was with it.
See, I'm surprised, because I thought if you weren't a fan of the movie, that it would really lose you, because it does spin its wheels a little bit in the middle sections.
In the middle,
of
but I think that's the downside of how this thing is directed, because it's very measured, the rhythm and the tempo is like this.
Never strays from that, really.
Yeah, and by the midpoint, you realize, okay, you realize where it's going in terms of the downward spiral. But otherwise, no, I'd recommend it a lot.
Excellent. All right, coming up next, Don Cheadle speaks up in our video segment. But first, here's a look at what's coming up on next week's show. All right, looking at movies new on DVD, I cannot recommend any of these babies. Spider-Man 3, a crushing disappointment. License to Wed, incredibly bad, and the Wendell Baker story nobody remembers. However, I can recommend for you Talk to Me. Don Cheadle, just reinforces my opinion and a lot of people's opinion that he's one of the best actors we have right now. And this is the story of Petey Greene, a real-life convict who became a talk show host in Washington, D.C. during a very tumultuous in the 60s and 70s. And it's just really well done.
No, I'd say the whole film is good. And
Cheadle's really good.
Yeah, but the whole film is good, I think. Anyway, just as Hollywood is bringing to market more and more fictionalized dramas relating, at least indirectly, to the war in Iraq, it's a perfect time, I think, to see the documentary No End in Sight. This is Charles Ferguson's meticulous exploration of what went wrong with the U.S.-led planning and prosecution of the invasion or regime change, or whatever you prefer to call it. This is one film that does not play fast and loose with the facts to bolster its arguments.
After the fall of Baghdad, we had no idea what really was going to happen, and there certainly didn't seem to be much of a plan. What we're generally being told is that we'd be getting back on the ships, within a month or two of essentially conquering Iraq.
No left-wing screed here, just one cogent explanation after another from the ranks of the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and the U.S. military. This is a sure bet for my top 10, I think.
I think it's a bona fide contender for best documentary at the Oscars.
Yeah, absolutely. So, No End in Sight and Talk to Me will be in stores on Tuesday. We'll be back to recap this week's show right after this.
Closed captioning for Ebert and Roeper is sponsored by...
Man has evolved to the point where he no longer needs to stand in line for tickets. The MovieTickets.card, available only at MovieTickets.com.
Guests of Ebert and Roeper stay at the Peninsula Chicago, the city's most exciting luxury hotel, located in the heart of Chicago's Magnificent Mile.
Okay, recapping the movies on this week's show. We both loved American Gangster. It opens next week. We also liked Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, Dan in Real Life, and Control. We didn't like Music Within.
Has that ever happened? Have we ever actually agreed on every single opinion? That makes me a little sad.
I don't agree with what you just said there. How about that?
But a good week at the movies, I would say.
Yes, very good. That's it for this week. Until next week, the balcony is closed.
The incredibly clean and fuel-efficient Civic Hybrid from Honda. Reverse your thinking.
Jelly Belly Berry Cherry Jelly Beans, each handcrafted with the finest ingredients. No wonder they taste so real. Get real. Get Jelly Belly.
With conditions like hypertension, straining should be avoided. Colace Capsule Stool Softener helps ease straining to make going easier. Try Colace capsules for effective, comfortable relief.